Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, this is Justin Brown. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Today, I have Ross Simmonds on the show. Ross is the CEO of Foundation, a company that uses research and data to help B2B SaaS brands generate more revenue, leads, traffic, and results through content marketing. Ross is a master at content creation and distribution and recently released his 6-day content distribution playbook. Today, we're going to break that down and more. Enjoy the show. So Ross, this show is for B2B tech marketers that have a hand in a company's podcast. And one of the things that they want to know is how to get people to consume the content that they're putting out. But one of the issues they run into a lot is actually getting the video snippets, the written content, the actual full-length episodes themselves in front of the right people. So I wanted to bring you on because there's really not many people I can think of that are better when it comes to not only content creation, but also content distribution. So what I was hoping to do today, at a minimum, is to break down your content distribution playbook. So let's start there.
Let's do it.
When you say, and I loved how you started the piece, that marketers around the globe need to cut the negative talk about promotion. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there's a big misunderstanding across the industry where marketers are oftentimes like afraid to be too promotional. Like they say they don't want to be the person who's creating too many threads. They don't want to be the person who's always on LinkedIn using these long form posts. They talk negatively about this idea of creating content and then distributing it, but not realizing that if you don't promote your content, then you're never going to really have the ability to reach your full capacity. Like you can't think of any artist, any musician actually in the early days of their career thinking, I'm not going to go on tour. I'm too good for that. I'm not going to promote my new album. I'm too good for that. But for some reason, marketers have fallen into the trap of really thinking, yeah, we don't need to promote ourselves. We don't need to amplify that. We've got it covered with our existing audience. And if they like it, they'll share it with their friends. And I think that's a mistake. I think the reality is that all marketers need to embrace is that there's billions of people in the world. And if you can create content and then distribute it onto the channels that they're spending time, you have an unlimited amount of opportunity in front of you.
And one of the things that you mentioned in the piece that really stood out to me is that the person on Twitter right now who sees your content isn't the same person who will be on Twitter in 6 hours.
Right.
So how do you balance sharing content enough, but not too much?
Yeah, I think it's really a mental game. I think more than anything, most people won't actually care too much if you retweet something 6 hours later. Like the vast majority of your followers aren't going to be upset and in a furious rage because you retweeted a piece that you published in the morning that same day. And the truth is, you can think about yourself in their shoes. You wouldn't care if someone did that. And what you have to be okay with is recognizing that, yes, you can do it too much, but I highly doubt that anyone is going to get to a point where they're too promotional. To get to a point where you're too promotional, you would have to be promoting something every 15 minutes on social every day. And I don't think that that's even possible unless you had a bot running and you didn't take any lunch breaks, etc. So for the most part, I think most people overestimate how promotional they actually are in comparison to the appetite that their audience has for their content. I think there's a disservice that is even being done. Like when you think about it, if you have produced something that is valuable, something that can help your audience, help your customer, help the person you're looking to connect with, fundamentally change the way that they operate in the world, fundamentally change their career, their trajectory, their path in the way that they're trying to solve a problem that is actually keeping them up at night. If you don't promote that piece of content that can actually help them and they never see it, they're going to continue to struggle for weeks, months, maybe even years, maybe for the rest of their life because you didn't promote that piece of content. So you need to start with that understanding that you're actually doing a service to your audience if you truly do believe that your content is worth sharing. And then while you listen to this, you should be thinking, okay, I need to go promote that thing that I developed like right now, right here, right now, this second.
And do you see any difference? And we're going to talk about this a little bit. You mentioned in the piece Facebook,
Yeah.
Twitter, LinkedIn. Do you see a difference between posting too much? And I would say the majority of the audience for this show is going to be Twitter, LinkedIn balance. So
Yeah.
we'll just focus right there for
Yeah.
right now. Do you see a difference in how much someone should be posting on Twitter with, lots of tweets is no big deal,
Right.
but versus LinkedIn where, for myself, I post one post a day and
Right.
I've done that for 2 years and other people post more. But what's your take
Yeah.
on how much on LinkedIn someone should be able to
Yeah,
post?
I think the frequency volume on Twitter is significantly higher than the frequency volume that is ideal on LinkedIn. And it's directly related to the way in which those platforms are treating content when they serve them up to your followers and your connection. So on Twitter, it's very much a chronological play for the most part, as well as there's an opportunity now more than ever to land on the Discover page, which I ultimately believe is truly one of the most like game changing opportunities that most people are still sleeping on. But if you can reverse engineer how to show up there, that can be a major play as well, because you can reach millions of people with one asset. On LinkedIn, I believe the threshold is between 3 to 4 posts a day. And the reason why is their algorithm is kind of built in what I would say seasons of the morning, the afternoon, the night, and then when everybody's asleep.
Interesting.
And at those points, your content is going to hit a sample size of people, and then it's going to decay in terms of engagement. And what you want to do is you want to maximize the amount of engagement that you have within those first 2 hours, because that's going to demonstrate to their algorithm whether or not this content is something that should continue to be seen and continue to be shown. So it's very important in the early minutes, hours of an asset to go live to generate engagement, but it can trickle for years, even sometimes to come thereafter. So, long story getting a little bit longer. Yes, there is value in kind of adjusting your distribution tactics by channel, but the key is to ensure that you are taking a perspective of understanding that every channel is different, and that yes, you come to those channels with content that is appropriate, but also you want to go at it from a frequency level that makes sense. Same situation on Facebook, same situation on TikTok, on Instagram, etc. The frequency is going to differ depending on those channels, but my advice to everyone is to always study the best and see what they're doing and leverage that as your first step to kind of figuring out what's going to work on the platform.
Yeah, and before I get my next question is going to be, I want to dive into your day one
Yeah.
of the content distribution playbook. But something that just kind of made me laugh is like you said making a long story longer,
Right.
and it really no, but it really is like the beauty of repurposing
Yeah.
and recreating content. If you think about it, I saw your LinkedIn slider with the content distribution playbook,
Yep.
and you did just like all 6 days
Yep.
in like 2 words,
Right.
and
Right.
then you've got the longer
Yep.
form, article on your site,
Yep.
and now and you could read that in about 10 minutes, and now we're breaking it down, we're really making
Yep.
a long story longer now on this podcast. Is we're kind of like reverse repurposing,
That's it.
if you will,
Yep.
but yeah, it just kinda made me laugh.
No, I love it. I think it's the key, right? Like you have to like the smallest tweet, it can be 280 characters or less, can become an entire essay if there's a deep enough insight into it. Like a simple tweet that sounds like, I don't know, marketing is more like psychology than most people think. That's a simple tweet. But you can then take
Mhm.
that single tweet and turn it into 5 psychology studies that you should know about
Yeah.
marketing. You can then turn that into a podcast. You can turn that into an ebook. You can turn that into an entire experience online. So, yeah, I think folks need to really recognize like you can evolve and remix this content that you're producing and unlock some amazing returns.
Yeah, and just like it's interesting to think that it doesn't always have to be that you start with the big pillar piece and
That's
work
it.
your way down into smaller
Yeah,
pieces. You can sometimes have smaller pieces that evolve into bigger and longer pieces as
exactly.
you dive into it.
Yep,
Well,
exactly.
let's jump into the playbook itself.
Do
So
it.
let's start with day one. So there's 6 days,
Yeah.
and we're gonna talk about each one of them.
Cool.
So day one is amplifying on social media.
Right.
What does that mean?
So when it comes to day one, you're amplifying it on the social channels that you own, meaning you're going to take that podcast that you've recorded and you're going to share it on Twitter. You're going to just take the headline of what it was and you're going to share it. But in addition to that, probably 3 hours later, you're going to create a Twitter thread that is built off of some of the insights that were inside of that podcast that you recorded. At the same time, you're then going to write a long form piece of content on LinkedIn. I'm talking about a status update, not necessarily a LinkedIn article. That happens on day two. And you're just going to plug in the comments that podcast. You're then going to share it on your Facebook page if you have one, or if it happens that you have a Facebook profile, you're going to share it on there and make sure that it's distributed. Now, when it comes to amplification on social, it's very possible that you have other channels that are lightweight and easy for you to distribute on. I would encourage you to share on those channels as well. But that essentially would cover day one from a simplistic playbook standpoint for amplifying that podcast on social.
Yeah, and this is gonna be awesome because I love podcasts that are, really breaking down how people can do things.
Right.
And I think we're gonna talk about that a little bit later regarding, is your content actually something that people want to consume?
Right.
But day two is going to be amplifying through native channels.
Yeah.
So what goes into that?
So this one, a lot of folks oftentimes most just overlook. Like everyone does day one and then they call it quits. But day two is when you are actually starting to really embrace the idea of creating once and distributing forever. So what you're going to do is you're going to write an article, you're going to write an essay or something that happens to reference this podcast that you were on or that you hosted. That piece of content is now going to be a small blog post that you're going to upload primarily probably on your site, but you're also going to publish it on medium.com. And when you publish it on medium.com, what's going to be interesting is that same Medium piece, you might have the opportunity to submit it to a publication that exists on that site that has a significant amount of followers. So what's that going to give you? It's going to give you net new reach to an audience that you didn't have before. You're going to take that exact same article and you're going to upload it to LinkedIn. In both of these, you're embedding either the YouTube video to your podcast or you're referencing with a link to your podcast so people can consume that original asset that you created. Now you have the distribution channels of Medium and LinkedIn promoting it as an article, but it's actually just your podcast and some written words surrounding it to kind of amplify it. Now, just for the icing on the cake, you're going to retweet that thread that you created yesterday just to put it in front of the people who were so busy yesterday or might have been on vacation and they overlooked it when they were on Twitter yesterday. But hey, now it's in front of them again, and you'll start to see another trickle of engagement on that thread.
And for day three, before I get into actually asking about it, I want to ask a two-part question.
All right.
So question one is when you say communities, what do you mean by communities? Like,
Yeah.
how would you define a community?
So right now there are thousands of marketers, there are thousands of accountants, there's thousands of developers, all inside of different communities that are relevant to them. And those communities are places that are kind of closed membership. So it's not just a open community of people who follow an individual. They're actually a community where people are asking questions, they're sharing their problems, they're having discussions around industry specific topics, and they are all coming together in a central place to help each other, support each other, grow together, learn together, etc. And this is happening on the internet every single day in a wide variety of different corners of the internet.
And so part two of the question is how can people leverage communities to distribute their content?
Right. So this is the key to day three. On day three, you're going to go and find these communities where your ideal audience is spending time. They might be on Slack. They might be in a Facebook group. They might be in a subreddit on Reddit. They might be in a Discord channel. They might be in the communities tab of Twitter. They might be in one of these places. And what you're going to do is you're now going to distribute your content, that piece that you created, in these various communities. When you do it, you always want to lean heavily into the idea that you're adding value to the community. You're not trying to extract it. So what I always advise people to do when you go into these communities is to come in very much thanking the community for what they did for you in terms of the content that they produced. Maybe you advise in a subreddit that you've been a long time lurker and that you are sharing this podcast because you want to give back to the community that has given so much to you. Then you share that link to the asset that you've created and you say, I really think you folks are going to enjoy this interview between me and so because it is filled with insights that will help you do X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z happens to be priorities and objectives that your audience is trying to solve and problems that they're struggling with. And if you can do that, you're not going to get banned and kicked out of these communities. You're going to be embraced and celebrated. You're going to also do this, not just in communities, but also inside of industry forums. You're going to look for forums. And yes, some people might think forums are dead, but if you do a quick Google search for marketing forums, crypto forums, accounting forums, you name it, whatever space, waste management forums, there is a forum out there for your audience. And if you can go into these communities as well and lean heavily into that, here's value for you approach, you will unlock some value in those forums as well.
Yeah. And, I think that there is a good delineation too. And I really like what you're talking about regarding the value that the communities bring, because there are the engagement groups that are out there that's post your post and you'll get a like out of it.
Right.
But if you're a marketer with a boss trying to drive revenue,
Right.
those likes aren't going to turn into actual dollars.
No.
And the way that those likes can turn into dollars, or, your podcast can turn into dollars, or your videos that you're putting out can turn into dollars, is to find, communities where you really can help.
That's
And I
it.
think that's an important delineation that not enough people know. And people think that, they're just chasing the engagement versus the actual results.
100%. No, I completely agree. I think it's a major mistake, but once you switch your mindset, the game just changes completely.
And so I like day 4 a
Yeah.
lot, newsletters and mixing things up,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I do with all of our customers is I meet with each one of them for a half an hour each week. And what
Cool.
we really talk about is ways to mix it up, because
Right.
a lot of times they've already followed a lot of the best practices I've laid out, or the things that I've laid out in the upfront strategy. But then there is just a sense of mixing things up.
Yeah.
So when you say that day 4 is newsletters and mixing things up,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
It means you start doing the things that don't scale, right? Like you start doing the things that are hard, but ultimately can also provide you with some amazing opportunities. So what you're going to do here is you're going to do things like just sharing a quick link on your Instagram story or on TikTok, and you're going to talk about what it is. Like maybe you do the green screen, you take a screenshot of the fact that you have this podcast, and you're going to talk into the camera and say, we just launched a new podcast. I think you folks are going to love it, blah, 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 blah. You share that on the various channels. People will engage, people will like it, etc. You're also going to do some things that are a little bit even more unscalable. Like you're going to reach out to a few friendlies, people in your network that you have a deep connection to, some a bit of a friendship, or maybe you're connected over the years. They might even be past clients, existing clients, etc. And you're going to ask them, hey, I just published this podcast. I would love for you to just retweet this tweet. I'd love for you to like this engagement. I'd love for you to like this post on LinkedIn, comment on this article, whatever it may be. Ideally, these people will want you to win, so they're going to help you out in that regard and help spread that content, especially if it's a piece that has started to hit that decay mark in terms of content reach. Now it might get some new life, but you're also going to start promoting it internally. So you're not just going to press publish and share it in your Slack channel. Maybe you start to go into the DMs of some of the key people at your company and start saying, hey, I know I shared this in the content promotion channel on our Slack. If you don't have one of those, you definitely should. But if you don't, and you started to promote in the DMs to some colleagues, that's a great way to also drive advocacy. You're also going to look at how can we support people on our sales team. Your sales professionals are talking to your prospects and your leads every single day. And for most marketers, they think that they can't influence sales. They shouldn't talk to sales, and that it should be two silos. That's a major mistake. When you press publish on one of these podcasts, you should be thinking, how can I ensure that the sales team has access to this and has a script that they can use to follow up with all of the cold and lukewarm leads that we've generated over the last 3 months, so they can reach out and say, hey, Sally, hey, Joe, I wanted to reach out and send this new podcast between our founder and so, because I really think it's going to help you solve this problem, which you talked about a few weeks ago. Would it be beneficial for us to even pick up a call and discuss some of the ideas that were shared on this podcast? I think it would go far. By doing that, you're opening up the ability to impact the bottom line for the business. And this is how you are able to retain your job and retain your seniority and your authority within the company, because you're no longer just talking about likes and retweets and shares. You're talking about the bottom line for the business. So I encourage B2B marketers to specifically be thinking how these podcasts can be leveraged and integrated with their sales efforts as well. And then the final one, encourage your team to add to their email signatures for a week, hey, did you hear the latest podcast? And encourage them to share that whenever they're sending emails, because inside of your company, there's probably hundreds of emails sent every day to new prospects, to existing prospects, existing clients. And this can be both a sales enablement tool, but also a retention tool if they're finding value.
And do you mind talking a little bit about newsletters as well, and just anything that you have there regarding using newsletters to promote your content?
Definitely. So again, when it comes to newsletters, there's a ton of them that your audience is probably subscribed to that are speaking directly to your niche. And when it comes to these newsletters, you essentially have two ways to get coverage. Either one, they've already organically seen it, or you've placed it in front of them and they're going to link to it in their newsletter where they're curating the top content in your space for the week, for the month, for the day, etc. And then they're going to plug to you. We have seen with a lot of the content that we produce at Foundation, a significant amount of traffic on the back of newsletters, just plugging content assets that we create. And the same thing works with podcasts. The next step, though, is to pay to play. There are a ton of influencers that run newsletters that you can pay to actually sponsor their newsletter. So this is also a massive opportunity. If you have a content marketing tool, if you're trying to sell to other marketers, let's say you run a tool, a solution that's trying to reach marketers, you want to find marketing newsletters, people who run marketing newsletters, and reach out to them and ask them if you can sponsor their newsletter to get your content, your podcast, a part of their content that they're amplifying and they're promoting. There's a ton of these out there. And that's an opportunity that I think a lot of B2B brands are starting to think about. And we're doing this type of work with B2B brands today and unlocking some amazing returns for clients in this realm.
Oh, it's probably, and it's my next question, but and I can elaborate on ours, I think, after I get your answer, but it's influencer marketing has been one of the biggest ways. I mean, we're a small business, we're running our jobs on a day-to-day basis, and we have been able to leverage influencers to help get the word out about our company. So I'll elaborate on what we've done in a second, but when you say, when you reference influencer outreach efforts for content distribution,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So what we've been doing is, like, we actually identify a handful of different influencers within a space, and then we're reaching out to them to engage in a few different ways. Either it's a pure play sponsorship where we're sponsoring their newsletter, we're getting a reference, they're linking to us, and it's called a day. Or we're engaging with them to develop Twitter threads. We're engaging with them to do a review of the product and then upload that to YouTube. We're engaging with them in those types of ways. But the key is to give the influencers the understanding and the ability to be great at what they do. I think a lot of brands make the mistake of jumping in and trying to create a very tight creative brief, trying to create a very tight window of opportunity and saying, you have to do it exactly this way. You have to refer to us this way. And as such, they're met with some watered down content. Your influencers know their space. They know what's going to engage with their audience. They know what's going to drive results. So you have to give them some wiggle room. So what we've been doing is we've been reaching out to the best Substack owners of a different niche or a different industry, engaging with them, getting their rates, finding out how we can collaborate, and then allowing our clients to partner with them to distribute their content as well.
Yeah, and not I feel like you might find this interesting, and maybe the audience will as well. But we've done something similar,
I
which
love it.
is that we offer a service
Cool.
that people want, right?
Yep.
People want to launch podcasts, but
True.
launching podcasts are hard. It's
Yeah.
why this podcast exists. It's why my company exists. And so what we've done is we've found influencers who are very prominent on LinkedIn typically,
Cool.
but also Twitter, and we've launched shows for them, so they don't have to pay
Smart.
anything. We own the IP, but they get to go out and have repurposed content and spray it all over the internet. And then when people say, hey, who's doing this content for you? Oh, it's Motion, it's Justin, it's the team over there.
Right.
We love those guys.
That's cool.
What have you. And it has been, I have somewhat of a voice, but I stay very narrow and very niche. Small marketing teams at tech companies
Right.
that care about podcasting.
Yep.
But then I've leveraged, very well-known demand gen marketers or
Right.
content creation marketers who get hundreds of likes if they say anything on
Right.
LinkedIn. And that has been a huge play for us
Right.
really to get our name out
I
there.
love it. That's genius. I think it's a smart play, and I think more brands can use that idea to kind of create win-win situations for everyone. Like if you have an opportunity where your product, your offering can be a value add to someone and their audience can be a value add to you, why not find a way to collaborate and unlock some success? Like there's enough for everyone to eat, I always say. And if you can collaborate to win together, it's a huge play.
Yeah, for sure. So for us, what better way has there been to say, this is what we do
Right.
than to actually do what we do and get other people to show it off for
That's
us.
it. That's it.
Um,
It's huge.
so and what we do with that is basically we're repurposing the podcast. They go
Right.
out there and they show our videos, they show graphics, images, what have you. So that leads us to day 6,
Right.
which is repurposing time, which
Love
is
it.
basically where I live and how and why my business exists.
Yeah.
So when you say repurposing of these content pieces, what are you referring to?
Yeah, so you can repurpose this content into so many different ways. Like I think podcasts and videos are some of the most repurposable content. Don't know if that's a word, but essentially, let's say it's a written piece. A written piece you can then turn into a YouTube video. A written piece you can turn into a PDF that's uploaded to LinkedIn as a document, which will act as a carousel. You can also upload a carousel to Instagram. You can still leverage tools like SlideShare, where you take that same PDF and upload it over there, or you can talk into the camera and describe the situation as a vertical video that goes out on your various stories. Day 6 of repurposing is taking that asset and turning it into other formats and other types of assets. One podcast can ultimately, if it's long enough and there's enough great sound bites, become 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different short clips of content. And those different clips all have the opportunity to reach thousands, sometimes even millions of people because the content within them are so valuable. So what you want to do is think about how you can chop up your content, whether it's turning a video into a audiogram, whether it's turning an audiogram into a Twitter thread, or whether it's turning a Twitter thread into a video that you're talking into the camera for. You want to realize that if you can create a piece of content once that is valuable, you can distribute it forever, you can repurpose it forever, you can find ways to repackage that thing forever, as long as the content at its core was valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And an episode that I actually recorded recently for this podcast was just me talking to camera, and that I developed that script off of a blog post. Like I think people
Right,
always think like everything has to start with a webinar or a podcast and you repurpose down, but it doesn't always have to be that way.
right.
You can start with the written component, which is kind of what we're doing in this conversation
Yeah,
today as well, is starting
true.
with your written component and turning that into a podcast,
Right.
which then again is going to be repurposed down into videos and different content and more written content. So there's really a lot that you can do on that, that journey
Yeah,
of how a content piece turns into lots of different things.
100%. No, completely aligned there.
So, something that I talk about a lot when it comes to content creation is making content that's relevant for the audience,
Right.
staying away from interviewing for the sake of interviewing.
Yeah.
Ross, I didn't have you on today, and you, I'm sure, noticed my kind of cold open to this
Yeah.
wasn't like, who are you? What do
Right.
you do?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about your
Yep.
background. Who do you and
Yep.
who do you work with? I'm trying to tackle very specific problems
Yep.
for my audience.
Yep.
So when you say the work needs to be of serious value to the audience, what does that mean?
Yeah, so you have to start your content by understanding the problems and the pains that your audience is facing on a regular basis. And the pains and problems don't always have to be something that's necessarily keeping them up at night. If you can find those, that's great. But it might be as simple as finding the next hire. It might be as simple as figuring out how to get more ROI out of the content that they're creating. It might be figuring out how they should be planning to navigate a looming recession and downturn or something of that nature. You just need to understand their pain and what their problems are. And then you need to ask yourself, is the piece of content that we're publishing going to fall into one of 4 categories? One, is it educational? It's going to teach them something new. 2, is it engaging? Is it going to start a dialogue within the industry and within this space? 3, is it entertaining? Maybe it's just meant to make them laugh because guess what? People are bored. People want to be entertained, especially if they're sitting in front of a desk all day. that is an okay type of asset to create as well. And finally, is it empowering content? Is this going to make people feel good about themselves for being in this industry or being a part of your brand, your community, your space, etc.? If you can do one of those four things, then the piece of content that you've developed is probably very valuable. And if you can create content like that consistently, you will be unstoppable when it comes to creating content that you can distribute for a very long time.
All right, I have a question for you. It's not on my list of
All right,
questions,
let's
but I'm
do it.
just curious. I'm
Let's
just
do it.
I'm just curious. So I see a lot about this is boring B2B content,
Yeah,
and I typically disagree with some of that stuff
right.
because I think if you're trying to tackle problems for an audience that really has those problems,
Yeah,
um, that people are going to consume the content. And if they want to go get funny or whatever,
yeah.
they're going to go listen to the Always Sunny podcast or something like that. So for you, what is your view on B2B content needing to be, and for the audience listening, I'm using finger quotes,
Yeah.
needing to be entertaining?
Right. So I don't think there's any industry that is too boring to create content for. What I think is actually real is that there's just a lot of boring marketers who are unwilling to get a little bit outside of the norm and do things that are different. You can create content that is targeting an organization that is selling dirt. Let's say you're trying to connect with people who buy dirt.
Yeah.
Very
Yep.
boring industry. But you know what's very interesting? What are the different types of dirt that actually go into creating a golf course for the PGA Tour? What's the difference between the sand versus the soil that goes into the fairways? It's very possible that that concept, that idea, while it is boring in nature, could be very intriguing to that industry and to that niche, the people who actually spend hours of their day studying and making $1 million decisions around what type of soil and dirt they should place in their resorts, into their golf courses, etc. So, from my opinion, you just need to be able and interested in your audience. You need to be interested in also considering the fact that they're not just linear people. They don't just care about the ROI of sand. What they also care about is maybe the PGA Tour and who's winning and who's losing, etc. So if you can create a connection back to their interests as a fundamental human, you can ultimately unlock even more opportunities for your brand. And that is the role of a great strategist. The great strategists, the great creators of the world understand that humans are like onions and we have a lot of different layers. And when you can tap into multiple layers to communicate well, I don't think there's a boring industry. I just think we've fallen victim to a lot of boring marketers.
Oh, trust me, we did a lot of video work before we were a podcast
Cool,
agency.
cool.
And I had some customers in some crazy spaces. I think one of the craziest ones was the Interlocking Concrete Pavement Institute,
Nice,
which on
nice.
paper sounds like so
Yeah,
boring, and then you learn about what it is, and like interlocking concrete pavement are like these crazy designed
right.
like patios and things that have different pieces of concrete that
Yeah,
are cut to all work together, and at the end of it it looks like a giant piece of artwork. And I
right.
think that's like a good like analogy to what you're saying with the dirt, is that pavement or concrete or dirt on paper are boring, but there are people who really care about those things, and care about them coming to life through their content and getting better at what they do. So
That's it.
I appreciate the dirt
I
piece.
like it. I like it. That's awesome. I appreciate it.
So let's pivot just a bit. So that was a big component of the distribution playbook, and I appreciate you tackling that. And I just want to ask you a little bit about your content.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
I noticed that you've started this. I don't know if it's a series or you just have ideas that you come up with, or
Right.
and maybe you can elaborate on it.
Yeah.
But it's well lit. It's shot well. Why did you start creating your video clip series?
So came from a deep epiphany, which shouldn't have taken me as long as it did to figure out. And the epiphany was I was talking to my friends about a great book that I had read, and none of them had read the book. And I was like, geez, like that's rough. And then I asked them, okay, but how many of you have watched this show? Everybody watched the show. And it clued to me very late in my life, way too late, that the vast majority of the world consumes content through video. Like the vast majority of the world wants video content. It's our human, like primary media consumption channel is video. But for years, I've been creating written word, like blog posts and writing has been the thing that built my career. And when I realized this, I clued into a simple fact, which is if I took a lot of my written content and I turned it into video, it would probably have a longer shelf cycle. So I started to make that move and shift to more video driven content because the humans kind of have spoken, and humans want video content. So let's embrace video content. So it really just came down to that. Like, people want video. So I wanted to start giving the audience what they wanted, which is more video content. And I started to do it in a sitting space, but I've also started to tinker and play with a few other formats as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons for that, and again, if we go back to why my business is in existence, is
Yeah.
that video's hard, right?
Yeah, it is.
And not that writing isn't hard, it's hard in a different way, but
Yeah.
just the action of setting up a camera. I mean, for full transparency, this is my first time shooting in my new at-home studio,
Love
so
it.
this is a
Love it.
different
It looks
camera
great. It
than I'm
looks
used
great.
to. Thank you, but I spent this morning, my desktop decided to go from Windows 10 to Windows 11 about 2.5 hours before this interview.
Stress.
And I spent
Stress.
about 2 hours trying to figure out how to get this setup that I spent all this time putting together back up and running. And
Right.
so I'm curious for you, because video really is that balance, right?
Yeah.
Of wanting to be able to just sit down and it works.
Yeah.
And then also it's difficult and it can be a pain to do, but that people like it. So what go into your shoots?
Yeah, great question. So every month we review the internet and try to find questions that people have asked me or that people are asking inside of marketing communities. And from there, we identify a few key questions that the internet and my team wants me to answer. And then I'll answer those questions in front of the camera. So we have a video team that goes out, they cite and identify a great place for us to record. And then we go down and we record those. I would record at home, but I have three little ones that tend to have meltdowns and start crying and screaming at random points in the day. So I don't do them here. But maybe when they move out, which will be a very long time because they're all under 4, I'll start doing them from a home setup as well. But that's essentially it. Like, we do them on a regular basis. We batch them, we record them, we get them all done, kind of thing. I aim to do the answer in one shoot, and that's it.
And I want to ask you a little bit about how you balance a lot of things. I have a few
Yeah.
questions for you about balance,
Yeah,
and especially with three little ones under 4, I'm sure
for
balance
sure.
is a big piece of just your everyday life.
Yeah.
So how do you? So you mentioned Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook in the playbook. Do you find it hard to balance multiple social media platforms?
I don't. I've gotten to a point in my career where I don't. I think the biggest reason why people struggle with the balance of multiple channels is actually more interpersonal problems than anything. I think it's truly about people aren't going to like the fact that I just shared this, and people are afraid of being unfollowed, and people are afraid of being talked negatively about because of promoting something too much, etc. I just have had a major mental shift where it's like, if people don't want to follow me because I'm promoting something or amplifying something the wrong way and it doesn't sit tight with you, I'm okay with that. And I think that essence just gave me a different perspective where I don't find it difficult to put up a post on LinkedIn. I can remember when I first got started, I would sweat before I pressed publish on a piece of content because I was afraid of how folks would respond. And I didn't know how the internet would react to my ideas and my thoughts. Now I don't care. It's like, it's just, I'm just at that point where I don't care. And I hope I can add value to the lives of others. And my intentions are pure. So if people don't see that and they want to unfollow me, they want to block me, I'm good with it. Life is short. No one's going to remember any of us in 200, 300 years. So why not?
And how do you decide what to post on social each day?
Yeah, good question. It's truly a bit about just my about came out, so some of your folks just realized, oh, this is a Canadian. But essentially, it comes down to figuring out like what is the types of content that people want to consume on different channels. And I have a fundamental understanding of that. The team has a fundamental understanding of that. And then it's like, let's ensure that we're adding value to these communities and we're distributing that content in the way that people want to receive that content on that channel. So on Twitter, we know that threads work well. You can't take a thread, copy and paste it, and put it on LinkedIn and expect the same types of results. It just doesn't work that way. So we would approach it
Mhm.
differently, and the story would differ, and the way that we would amplify something there would differ. So it's really just going at it channel by channel, understanding the nuances of each, and also just like being okay with the idea of producing content without fear. That's really it.
Awesome. And I've got a couple of closing questions here. We're coming up on our time, but I want to get these ones out.
Let's do it.
As I'm sure you know, with your business and your life and what you do as a professional, that over the last couple of years, the rise in social media and content creation has really grown, especially
Yeah.
throughout the pandemic and people setting up, like I have, studios at their
Yeah.
houses. What trends do you think we'll see in content over the next 1 to 2 years?
I think we're going to see a major move in the content industry towards brands being less important and people being more important. And I think this has started to already show indications of it across the industry,
Yep.
especially in B2B. Like you can tell that LinkedIn is favoring humans over pages. And when that starts to happen, it's for a reason. The reason is that people
Mhm.
want to connect with people. We don't want to connect with logos. And when you feel connected to a human, it actually feels real. It's like I might meet this person in person. I want to connect with them. I want to build a relationship, etc. Versus a logo, you don't know who the social media manager is behind it. You don't really care sometimes. You're going to complain about the fact that your food was cold, and you don't have that empathetic connection that you do when you're connecting to people. So one of the things that I think is going to shift is just like a complete focus by brands on people first and embracing the idea of letting people be the face of the brand, celebrate the brand, giving them the ability to promote and have podcasts, etc. I think that's where the world is going, especially in the wonderful world of B2B. Another thing that I think is going to be changing the way that content is done is more emphasis on exclusive content. And what I mean by that is I think there's a lot of value inside of these communities that are popping up within a wide range of different niches and organizations. And the people who are in them are highly targeted, highly valuable. And if you as an organization can either own the community or become a part of these communities and add value consistently, I believe that it's one of the biggest arbitrage opportunities that exist today. I've been preaching about Facebook groups for probably 5 years now. And yes, Facebook groups can be controversial in many ways, but there is not a doubt in my mind that there is a ton of ROI to be captured inside of these communities and inside of these groups that brands should be thinking about and taking advantage of.
And if you look at it from, you talked about how the individual is really taking off. And I think that follows maybe, entertainment or influencers in other spaces.
Right.
And people now paying individuals for content or media or what have you. So if we go up to Canada, actually,
Yeah.
with a great example is the Trailer Park Boys. For
Right.
anyone
Right.
who is familiar, they are
Local.
comedic icons in Canada, and they had their show on Netflix for years, and they have such diehard fans that they're taking all their new content and they have it on their own website that looks terrible, by
Fascinating.
the way.
It would.
And and I think that's part of their brand.
Yeah.
But they're uploading their new episodes and new shorts and things like that for a small, like $4 per month fee or something, I think I saw.
Right.
And that's just one little sign of people being willing to pay for exclusive content for things that they care enough about. Now, I know that's entertainment and these are comedians, but I think what we've seen over time is that we're getting these kind of cult followings in B2B and in business more and more as time goes by and people create more things. So that's my one
I love that.
my one way to relate that back.
Hey, I love it. I'm a big, I'm from Nova Scotia, so the Trailer Park Boys made up a good chunk of my adolescence years, and they had a place called Bubbles Mansion. Feel free to do a quick Google search on that one. That saw me many times when I was in university.
Yeah, I just I watched them also when I was like growing up.
Love it.
Just a funny show.
Hilarious.
And I was like, are they like done? What happened? There's
Right.
been nothing on Netflix.
Yeah.
So I looked them up and yeah, they're charging a small fee and they upload new content like a couple of times a week, and they're shorts and longer episodes, and they're doing exactly what you said. They're
That's it.
gating their content.
Yeah.
They're charging a fee for it, and they're getting the money directly to them, which I think is fascinating
Awesome.
and good for those guys.
Indeed, 100%.
All right, one last thing that I have to tell you before I let you go
Let's
is
hear it.
that the butter graphic on your site is one of my favorite website
I
graphics that
love it.
I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
I don't know if a graphic has really embodied like it's smooth like butter,
Yeah.
I assume, because when that thing slides across the screen,
That's
you
it.
feel that it is smooth like butter. So,
It's
for
true.
my own selfish reasons,
Yes.
can you tell me how you came up with that?
Yeah. So for folks who are listening and are trying to picture what this looks like, foundationinc.co, you will see this. But the problem that a lot of CMOs, marketing teams have is that their marketing engines feel clunky, they feel messy, and they do not in any way feel smooth. And butter is one of the smoothest things in the world if you melt it. And if you live in Canada, you should always put your butter on the counter instead of in the fridge, but that's a whole different discussion. I don't want to go down that debate, but I've had a lot of them over the years. But essentially, the idea is as simple as that. We help organizations make sure that their content marketing engine from a creation distribution lens is running as smooth as butter and there's no hiccups. You don't need to worry about whether or not you're getting a report. You don't need to worry about whether or not your team is creating content on time, et cetera. We just make that process and experience very smooth.
Well, that's great, and I think that's a great spot to end, which is you did just tell people where they can find the company, but I'm just gonna ask you, where could people go to learn more about you and about Foundation?
Yeah, so definitely check me out on all of your favorite platforms. You can find me on LinkedIn, Ross Simmonds. On Twitter, I'm at the coolest cool. If you have me on LinkedIn, I do have a bunch of connection requests. So just make sure that you mention in the request that you heard me on recorded content, and we can definitely link up. I would love that and appreciate it. But yeah, you can find me on the internet. I'm all over the place. But Justin, before we do wrap, I want to say thank you to you for having me on. Thank you to the listeners. I think the industry at large needs content like this. So my hat's off to you for contributing this type of value to the industry. It allows the marketing industry at large to improve and get better. And that's great for everyone.
Well, Ross, I appreciate it. Thanks for making some time with me. I appreciate you spending some time today. It was great having you on recorded content.
Thank you.